When my teacher, Diane Banaj, met her teacher, she asked him, what are the conditions for practicing, for studying with you, for ordaining with you as a Zen priest? And he responded, sit down, shut up, and live on alms for 10 years. Sit down meant to do zazen, to meditate. Shut up means not to talk about your experiences, not to give interviews to media, because it will ruin your understanding if you talk about what you're experiencing too soon. So he told her, shut up, don't talk about what you're doing. And also there would be a special attraction to her because she was an American living in Japan. And so of course media would pick up on that. So he said, don't give interviews, don't talk about what you're doing. And the third thing was to live on alms, because he was a poor priest. He didn't have a lot of money, and he couldn't support her financially. And actually, that's the kind of tradition of Buddhism, where monks and nuns are dependent on the lay community for sustenance, particularly in terms of medicine, of clothing, and food. Those are the three main things. And he says, no, you can't depend on me. You'll have to depend on the goodwill of others. So that was her conditions for ordaining. And he told her, take your time to really consider if this is something that you want to do. So she said, yeah, I'll have to think about this. So don't waste your time. If you're not sure, don't waste your time, don't waste my time. Go back and really think about whether this is what you want to do. So she went back to her apartment that she had been living in for some 9 years in Tokyo at that time. And within 6 months she had managed to arrange her life so that she could let go of her work, most of it, and get rid of almost all of her possessions. She told a funny story that one time, in the process of getting rid of her stuff, she understood why the layman Pang, who was lived during ancient China, he was a layman and was considered deeply enlightened. And this layman, he took all of his possessions and put them on a boat in the middle of the river and then sunk the boat. And people asked him, well, wouldn't it be better for you to have distributed those things to people in need? And my teacher understood why he didn't do that. When people learned, when the neighbors of hers learned that and friends learned that she would be leaving the world, they knew that she had certain items that they wanted. And they became obsessive about it. 3 Japanese women one time came with tea and cakes and wanted to make her feel comfortable. And as they began to serve the cakes and the tea, they started saying how they heard that she was going to be leaving the world and that maybe she wouldn't need that particular item or that particular item, and if they maybe could have it. And she's told one of the women, well, actually, I already gave this to somebody else, and the women began to finish up their cake and tea and said, okay, well, thank you very much. We have to go now. So So some of the things that she was able to give to other people, and some things she tried actually burning, but she got in trouble because a police officer saw her burning some of her items and said, "You can't do that." So, just to say how difficult it was for her to, I think, letting go of things is not easy, even for somebody who decides to leave the world behind, so to speak. It comes with, attachments are really there. They're really attachments. So, how did she get into this position in the first place? She was kind of at a crossroads. She had been studying with a different teacher, a Rinzai Zen master. And Rinzai Zen is known for its severity and its strictness. Actually, Soto can be just as strict. But Rinzai, Zen master Rinzai, or Lin Chi in Chinese, was known for shouting and yelling at his students. Anyways, she was studying with this Japanese Rinzai master named Omori Sogen Roshi. And Omori Sogen, he had many students, and when she first came to his Zen dojo, she would be sitting in meditation. They had meditation sittings every morning. His temple was just 3 subway stops away from her Tokyo apartment, so she could get there if she got on this one particular train and didn't miss it by 1 minute. She could get there just in time to be on time for morning zazen, and they would sit for maybe 50 minutes in silence. And she commented that the air in the room that they would sit in, maybe herself and 20 other all men, monks and laymen alike, would sit together, and the air was so still you could cut it with a knife. And Omori Sogen Roshi had said, if you really listen deeply during zazen, then you can hear the ash from the incense drop into the incense holder. We don't burn incense here, but at least not right now. But it just gives you the sense of like how deeply we're capable of listening, or at least to encourage us to listen really deeply when we sit. So they would sit 50 minutes, and they could. And this was in the this was in the late 60s, early 70s. This was in the kind of early 70s. And if you were to sit in a Zen dojo in Japan, you had to sit at least half lotus. And my teacher was not able to sit half lotus, or she was, but she'd have one knee up, so she could put one foot on her opposite thigh, and her other knee was at least 6 inches off of the ground. And she was in a lot of pain, especially the first few months. She said it took her a while. Her legs, the muscles around her hips, took after sitting daily like that, they finally stretched enough that her knee could come to the ground. But during this time, she said she had a mantra that she would say to herself while she was sitting for 50 minutes like this. 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Would someone ring the ding-dang bell and get me out of here? So she struggled a lot. And she said Omori Sogen Roshi gave her a place to burn up her crud. She was in a really bad space at that time. She sat with him like that daily for about 3 years. And she had been reading about Zen for 20 years. She was a native of Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania. And when she was college age, she went to Texas Christian University to study ballet, and she minored in French. And at that time, this was in the 1950s, and she came across a book by D.T. Suzuki called Zen Buddhism, or something with Zen in the title, and she she picked it up out of the library at TCU and began reading it, and she said that she didn't understand. I'm paraphrasing her, so she didn't understand what she was reading on one hand, but on the other hand, it felt very familiar. And she continued to read about Zen for maybe the next 15, 20 years until she actually met a Zen teacher that she sat with and actually did the practice. So she had been thinking about doing Zen for a number of years prior to doing that, and a series of things happened to her over the years, I think, that probably led up to that. The last thing being being in a really bad relationship with somebody in Japan. She had been married actually prior to living in Japan for as long as she had been. She was married to a very wealthy businessman for about 6 years. And that's actually what initially got her to Japan. Here's somebody from central Pennsylvania, rural central Pennsylvania, marries somebody quite wealthy who was able, for business reasons, traveling to various countries around the world. And she of course, went with him. And one of the stops along the way was Japan. When they later separated, she returned to Japan because she knew that she could find work teaching English and continued to train in classical ballet and to perform as well. And then she was in a relationship while she was there that went sour. And she came to a place where she was getting too old to be successful in dancing, because once you reach around 33, 34 years old, you cannot be a professional ballet dancer and compete with others that are in their 20s. So she realized she had to make some transition there. And it was around this time that she found Omori Sogen Roshi. And she said that he gave her the opportunity to burn up a lot of her crud. For 3 years, that's what she burned up her crud. And I like that image of burning. That's sometimes what our meditation can be, is burning up or purifying our heart, mind, and body. And even there's images at Tofukuji, you can see at this temple in Japan, around the Zendo. They have these, it looks like monks sitting in meditation cut out of a window. So it's just, it's a cutout of a figure of a monk in the windows. And there's flames coming up out of their, coming, like going upwards. And it just makes sense, when you see it, and when you've been sitting for a while, this kind of image makes sense. What we're doing is we're creating like a bonfire with our own body mind. Our own body mind becomes a bonfire when we sit in meditation very deeply. And it's another way of talking about the concentrated mind. That's how our mind gets concentrated. Anyways, so she sat with Omori Sogen for 3 years, and then she wanted to ordain with him. And he told her he could not do it because he had, at that point, just had strokes. He was having a series of strokes. He was not physically well enough to ordain any other students. And also, he couldn't train her there with all men. She would have to go to a place that trained women. And he said that at that time, the last Rinzai Zen training center for women had just closed down. So he suggested to her that she go on what's called the 88 Temple Pilgrimage around the island of Shikoku. And it was a pilgrimage that was started at least probably 1,000 years prior. And what it is it's possible to walk to all of these 88 temples around the perimeter of the island. There's a path, and pilgrims, they dress all in white, they carry a staff, and they go from one temple to the other. They spend the night at the temple feeds them, and then they walk on their way to the next temple. and wearing white means you're dead to the world. And she was at first very reluctant to go on this pilgrimage, but as she began the pilgrimage, she got more and more into it. And walking, some people actually drive. There's bus tours that do it. But walking takes about 6 weeks. And as she got into the walking aspect of it, going from one temple to the other, physically she was feeling better. She had asthma, so living in Tokyo, in a modern industrial city, lots of air pollution, and her asthma was always a problem for her. And even to this day, it's been a problem for her. I can remember times when I would wake up and we would sit zazen together, and my teacher would come in to the zendo, and she could barely breathe. I thought, oh my God, we have to get a doctor. I was thinking this in my head as I'm sitting facing the wall, and she would say, there's times when I said, "Are you okay? Do we need to?" Just no, I'm okay. This will take care of itself within the first 10 minutes of sitting, and it always did. She'd start out breathing really heavily, and I thought she was going to gasp to death, and slowly her breath would slow down. She would be able to breathe more easily. By 10 minutes, you couldn't even hear her breathing anymore. She had settled that much, and then we would continue sitting, and she was totally fine the rest of the time. So when she went on this 88 temple pilgrimage, one temple to the next, physically she was starting to feel better because she'd been walking every day, just focusing on saying the Heart Sutra and going from one temple to the next. Very meditative. And she found her teacher to be between temples 82 and 83. So towards the end of this pilgrimage, she found her teacher. And one of the things that actually, when she was in training with her teacher, she lived in a soy sauce vat when she was there. Her teacher was himself, like I mentioned, he was very poor. Most Zen priests in Japan, they are sons of temple fathers. So their father was a priest, and the successor is usually the son, the first son. Sometimes the first daughter, depends on the situation. But Noda Daito Roshi, whose image you can see there in the center, he was not a temple son. He went into the priesthood for other reasons that I won't go into here. But his father owned land, and he inherited that land, and because he was the eldest son, and when he finished his training, he had this mountain temple. He had this mountain land that he converted into a temple. And when he was just starting out, his zendo was a white school bus. He cut out all of the seats in the school bus, and on the top racks he put zafus, meditation cushions, and then he had an image of a Bodhidharma at the back of the bus. That was his little altar, and then he'd sit in zazen on the bus itself. That was his first temple. And my teacher, when she first met him, she got off the pilgrimage, and because she saw a sign for a Zen dojo. So she thought, maybe I'll go to this place and check it out. And she sees this land there. This is kind of on a mountainside, and she sees this white school bus in the middle there, and she has no idea that it's a Zen dojo. She peeks in the window, and she sees this. She sees the seats all soldered out, zafus on the top racks, and an altar in the back with an image of Bodhidharma. And she's just astounded, like, how could this be? And her then teacher to be, Noda Daito Roshi, says, "Pilgrim, your white kimono is not so white. Why don't you stay the night, and I'll wash it for you, and you can be on your way the next day." Well, and she was grateful to him for that, because her kimono was dirty. Gave her some other clothes to wear, and he washed her kimono. and set it out to dry. Well, lots of rain came that day, that evening, preventing the kimono from drying, so she ended up staying there until it dried. It took 3 days. And during that 3-day period, they had these conversations where she could talk with him about the possibility of training with him. And when she asked him if she could ordain with him, he said, no, you can't. Or no, she asked him if she could train with him, not ordain with him, just train with him. And he told her no. And she said, well, why not? He says, well, because you're a woman and I'm a man. And people will have ideas here. I'm by myself up here on this mountain, and all the people around this neighboring mountain will know that there's a female and a foreigner staying with me, and they'll have ideas. So you can't train here. The only way you can do it is if you become a nun. If you leave the world and become a nun, then you can train here. And so then they began to talk about this, and this is where she asked him, what are the conditions for me to become a nun? And he said, sit down, shut up, and live on alms for 10 years. So she said, okay, well, I'll have to think about this, and return to her temple. Or return to her home in Tokyo. So this is, she did return to Kappa Dojo, where Noda Daito Roshi was, and she lived in a soy sauce vat for 15 months through the winter. And what he did to start out with, because he didn't have any buildings to start with, Noda Daito, he used what he had on hand. At the foot of the mountain where he lived was a soy sauce factory. And they were discarding old soy sauce vats. And these soy sauce vats are quite large, actually. They were discarding them. They were discarding the wood. And he asked the owner if he could have the discarded soy sauce vats. And they said, of course, take them. So he carried them up, one board at a time, up the mountain, and he reconstructed them into a little hut, and cut out a window and a door, and made a roof on top. And so it's circular, and maybe about a 6-foot diameter across, and maybe about 6 feet tall. And this is where my teacher lived for the first 15 months. And after that time, her teacher's teacher said that she really needs to train with other women and in a larger group. She can't just continue to train with him like that on the mountain. And she was somewhat reluctant to do that because her asthma had cleared completely because she was breathing mountain air, and she was working very hard. She had been doing a lot of physical labor, so much so that if she looked in a mirror, she had some muscles in her arms and shoulders almost like a man. And so she was reluctant to go up there, and her teacher inquired, why are you reluctant to change? Well, because the place that you want me to go is in Nagoya. It's in a city, and my asthma is going to return. And his response to her was, in Japanese, nakayoku suru, meaning make friends with your illness, make friends with your asthma. Don't do things just because of an illness. Don't not do things just because of your illness. You have to get along with that. So she reluctantly agreed and began training, and she continued to train for the next 8 years in the women's monastery. There's all kinds of stories I can tell you, I can share with you about that. But I'd like to share just a couple more things, just a little bit about her growing up. I mentioned that she was a classical ballet dancer, and she started that when she was 13 years of age. Her parents were reluctant to have her do ballet because they lived in a rural town and they'd have to go a little ways to have her train. And they told the minister, see if you can say something to her that would make her discontinue with this interest in ballet. So the minister at the next sermon talked about how dancers go to hell. And my teacher at that time, as a 13-year-old, was so upset about hearing that, she said she vowed never to go back to the church again. So, and so that's the kind of person, at that young of an age, being really clear what she wanted to do. Not saying that there's anything wrong with it. That's just where she was in particular rural central Pennsylvania. She was really, she had her mind set on something. That's what she wanted to do, and she did it. She had to. Her parents wouldn't pay for the lessons. She had to. She had to earn her own money, and she would do that by babysitting and writing book reports for people, for other students in her classes. Give me your book. Give me your book. I'll write a book report for you. You give me some money for it. But where she lived in the town of Lewisburg, a couple of things happened. One was that when they moved into the house they lived in, the previous owner was a missionary, a Christian missionary to China, and this was her first exposure to any language other than English. This was her first exposure to any language other than English, to my knowledge, where she saw all of these letters that, as the missionary and his family were cleaning out of the house, she saw all these letters, and they weren't in ABCs. They were in squiggly lines going vertical down a page. And she thought, wow, there's a whole nother way. There's a whole nother world. There's a whole other way of living and writing and thinking. And she had an uncle, too, that Lewisburg is known for the university. It's a university town, somewhat similar to Ames, except it's a lot smaller. And the university had a very large library. Her uncle was a history teacher, and he said to her, let me see your history book. And again, this is in the 1940s. She was born in 1939. So this is in the 1940s and 50s. Let me see your history book. And there was all of this information about the West, United States, Europe. And when it came to Asia and other parts of the world, there's maybe a page or something, page or two. And he showed her a map of the world, and he said, look at how large Asia is, and look how much space is dedicated in your book to the country of Asia. Does that seem proportionate? And she said, no. So he encouraged her to go to the Bucknell University Library and to read up on Asian literature and Asian history to balance out her understanding. And so she did that at a very young age. So again, another thing that kind of, how does a person get to be where they are? I have no idea, but these are some little steps along the way. And you can probably think about your own life story and how did you get to be where you are. And I'll just close with one last story. As she was growing up in this small house in Lewisburg, they lived across the street from a doctor who was also a Huron Indian, a native person. He and his wife lived together. And they had a unique relationship between my teacher's family. Her given name was Patricia. So the Benages and this Huron doctor across the street. The doctor would give the children, Patricia and her brother Sonny, medicine in exchange for garden vegetables. So Patricia's father enjoyed doing gardening, and he would grow vegetables, give them to the doctor in exchange for medicines as needed. So when the kids, when Patricia and Sonny got sick, instead of getting the pink and white pills that their friends got that they were jealous of, they would get tinctures and herbs and salves. And one day, so the doctor's name was Dr. Suey. Dr. Suey was sitting out on his porch and enjoying just sitting out there. And my teacher, as a young girl, walked by and said, "Hi, Dr. Suey." And Dr. Suey said, "Hi, come on over here. I've got something for you. I've got a gift for you." And he pulled out his, he had a medicine bag wrapped around his on a kind of necklace. And he gave it to her. And Patricia said, "That's strange, Dr. Suey. It's not my birthday. Why are you giving this to me?" He says, "Well, I'm going home tomorrow, and I wanted to pass this on to you before I go." And Patricia said, "Oh, I didn't know you were going." So, but she left, and she told her mother, Evelyn, "Look, Dr. Suey gave me this medicine patch." And her mother, Evelyn, said, "Huh, that's strange, honey. It's not your birthday. Why would he do that?" "Well, he said he was going home tomorrow." "I didn't know he was going home. Nobody said anything." Guess what happened? The next morning, there was wailing. Dr. Suey's wife is wailing. Dr. Suey had gone home. So we all have interesting stories to tell, and I encourage us to consider our own stories. But I like to share some of these stories about my teacher. I have lots more to share, but I have to say too that this is my telling of it. This is the way I heard it, and if she heard me saying these things, I don't know if she would agree. So anything I say here, it's how I remember her saying it, and please forgive me if I made a mistake there. Anyways, thank you for hearing me, and let's prepare to sit.